It's one thing to be an individual contributor and a completely different thing to be a leader of a team. It's one thing to be leading a team of 5 to 10 people and a completely different thing when your team grows to hundreds. The game changes all of a sudden, but maybe you still want to have that startup culture of high performance and innovation, the respect for the individuality of each of your team members, the autonomy that they need to thrive. So, how do you do that when teams grow and you are having a bigger pressure for structure and processes? Today, I will interview Wade Bruce to answer this and many more questions. With 15 years of experience in the tech industry, Wade is now the CTO at Fetch Rewards, a leading rewards app in America that has experienced tremendous growth in the last years. Wade started as an individual contributor at Fetch and quickly grew through the ranks to become the technology leader he is today. Do you want to learn how he did it and what did it take? Stay tuned and enjoy the ride. Wade, thank you so much for being here.
Great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Wade, let's start with the basics. Can you share your career progression from your early days as a developer to becoming the chief technology officer at Fetch?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started my career at State Farm, which is a huge organization, tons of engineers, very kind of slow, methodical, and large. And it was actually a great place to start because they had this wonderful onboarding program. You spend months onboarding before you even hit the floor, you actually get out into production code. And so, as a place to start my career, it was awesome. It really solidified a lot of the concepts that I learned in school, and it set me up for success in the future. And I also had good mentor, good manager, and those things are super important when you're early in your career. Uh, but my last couple of years there, I was working in a specific part of the company where it was more of a startup feel. I was literally working out of a data warehouse. There's only 50 of us or something like that. And eventually that kind of gave me an itch to go into the startup world. And that's where I transitioned and eventually worked in a social media marketing startup, spent a few years there, transitioned into a Series A company, which was an insurtech startup, spent some time there, and then eventually landed at Fetch, where I joined as a senior backend engineer. And then, kind of as opportunities came about and the company was growing, found myself able to step into different leadership positions and eventually land as the CTO.
Was there any pivotal moment or decision that influenced that path? I mean, you were a senior engineer and then you transitioned into leadership. Do you remember a moment where you were like, okay, I want to be leading teams, or someone said something to you and you were like, okay, yes, I'm open to this opportunity?
I think so. Actually, when I switched to Fetch, I was the engineering manager at Bunker, and when I made the transition, they're like, "We don't really need managers," and I was like, "Well, that's fine. I can be a senior engineer and happy to contribute that way." I've always viewed startups as filling the gap, and at different sizes of the company, there's different types of gaps to fill, but I'm there really to make the startup as successful as possible. And so when I first started at Fetch, that wasn't the need, but as we grew and more people joined, there was just more leadership opportunities. And I didn't picture myself necessarily landing in this spot at Fetch, but I knew someday I wanted to be a CTO somewhere. And so I would take those leadership opportunities when they came about and uh, sort of over time ended up happening at Fetch, which was different than I anticipated. I always thought I would kind of continue to do this thing for a while and then kind of go back to like a Series A or pre-seed kind of company and do it from there.
So it's interesting. You said you always knew you wanted to be a CTO. Um, you, of course, went to school, have a lot of friends that are engineers. Some want to become CTOs, some don't want to become CTOs. What do you think is the difference, and how do you spot that difference within yourself that you kind of knew you wanted to be a CTO eventually?
Yeah, it's a good question. I grew up in a family with a small business, and so my parents ran a janitorial business. They had a company, and I kind of always envisioned myself as having my own company. But once I got into the startup world, I realized I could kind of have the best balance of both worlds, where it's like I get this entrepreneurial itch scratched, but I didn't necessarily have to like go out and completely do something on my own. Um, And I think for some people, the path they want to go, right? Do you want to be extremely deeply technical in a specific area and be that staff or principal engineer? Or do you want to lead in a different way? You still need to have technical chops, obviously, but do you want to inspire people and encourage people and hopefully make an impact in that direction? And I think for me, it's always been about where can I have the most influence and what opportunity or path takes me that direction. So obviously, this is a position where you get to have a lot of influence and impact, but I don't think there's anything, you know, right or wrong about going down either one of those things. In fact, I encourage people all the time, if you want to be that highly technical person, you know, there's the sky's the limit for that career path too.
So having an influence, having an impact was very important, is very important to you. And that comes with effectiveness, effective leadership within the tech industry, right? So how do you define that? What is effective leadership for you? And in what ways have you adapted your style, your leadership style, to get a culture of high performance at Fetch?
Yeah, there's a few things. I think for me, I've always told people like it's if you're in a position of leadership, it's really easy to tell people what to do. Like that's actually the easy thing to do. The hard thing to do is to influence people in a way where they would make the same decision whether you're telling them to do it or not. And so that's where I try to focus my energy. It's not about just telling people what to do, it's about getting them to understand what we're trying to do as a group. And hopefully, then, whether it's the exact same decision as me is not that important, as long as the outcome is like we're working towards the right thing. So that's where I typically focus. And as far as high performance, I always talk about just being in a group of growth. So I want people at Fetch that want to grow as people and not just necessarily at work. Like I'm not just looking for people who want to climb some career ladder. We want people that want to be better versions of themselves every day. And my opinion or my belief is that if you do that and you have a large group of people that are all like that, it's kind of a compounding impact, right? Like you want to grow every day and you're surrounded by people that want to grow every day, like you're going to have this meaningful growth holistically, and that's obviously going to be good for the company.
How do you spot that? How do you spot people that want to grow as people want to get, be a better version of their selves every day? You're interviewing, what are you looking for?
Yeah, so we look for people that are highly ambitious, right? People that like ambiguity, that don't necessarily want to be told exactly what to do. I think I always tell people if you're the kind of person that wants like a very specific ticket cut for you and handed off to you, that just isn't the place for you. If you're the type of person who wants an ambiguous problem and you want to go figure it out, like, then we are the place for you. I think that's a really common trait across those people. Um, Obviously, you can look at people's like their history and where they've come from. New grads, you can just kind of look at their energy and how they're excited about growing and what they're looking for, right? Are they looking for just a job or are they looking for somewhere that's really going to challenge them and make them better? Those are the kinds of things that typically stand out.
Now, when we were getting ready for this, you talked a lot about, respecting developers in their own unique way, etc., and give them that autonomy to showcase their unique talents. That how do you how do you do that? Or what initiatives or practices have enabled you to be successful here?
Yeah, so I think it's about providing the right level of autonomy. There was a time when I worked at State Farm that I would tell my managers like I feel like I'm fighting to do the job you hired me for, right? Because there's so much red tape. Like, why did you bring me here if you didn't want me to go deliver on these things? And so that's the main thing I think is just removing as much of that friction to how people function and like empowering them to go out and execute. And I also tell people on their first day when they start with the company, I meet with them and I tell them, you don't have to earn trust. You have trust. We start with that. Obviously, you can lose trust, but like we're not going to make you earn it. You start with that day one. We're going to give you as many permissions as we possibly can, and we want you to go ship code on the first day. And by doing that, I think you really empower people to kind of make those decisions that they need to make to go out and execute. And then we try to, as much as possible, give people some guardrails, but very broad, where they can choose how they want to function as a team. Do they want to do sprints? Do they want to do Kanban? What languages are they going to use? And then there's other ways that we kind of keep that from getting out of control. Engineers, people always say engineers are kind of lazy. So the more tooling we provide for specific languages that we want to motivate and encourage, the more likely someone is to use that. But also, I don't want to tell them in the case where there is a different technology that's right for that solution that they can't use it. Like go out, use it, introduce it to the company, that's fine.
In terms of those tooling and everything, how does AI fit in your toolbox, in your developers' toolbox? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's similar to how we do everything, which is if you think there's a tool that's going to help you, we will pay for it and we'll get you a subscription to it. We don't necessarily across the board just give everybody a license to everything. Um, there are some things that's true for, but generally it's like if you like, I don't know, one AI tool over the other and you're more effective with one, we want to support you in that way. We just have to make sure that we do our due diligence before we like onboard that stuff and make sure our data is safe and all those kinds of things. But in general, we support whatever direction the engineers want to go. And then for me, it's also about because this stuff moves so quickly, it's about being on a cadence of just checking, okay, what advancements have happened, what new developer tooling is out there. Should we look to do, excuse me, should we look to do an experiment with it and kind of figure all of that out? I do believe there's a ton of stuff out there that's helpful. I think depending on if you're a junior engineer or a very senior engineer, the advantages could be very different. Yeah, and so it's like it's not ubiquitous across everybody. I don't think like this, you bring in Copilot and all of your engineering is 10% better. Like I don't subscribe to that. Um, but there's definitely a lot of opportunity to use this stuff. I use GPT every single day, basically, to make myself more effective, and we encourage the teams to do that as well.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about those guardrails, right? And as you keep growing, um, where do you put the guardrails, right? And what strategies can you implement to maintain a balance between operational efficiency and allowing space for creativity and freedom? You clearly like to give people freedom. You were a developer and you know that you needed that freedom and you hated the red tape that, basically prevented you from doing the work that you were hired to do, right?
Mhm.
But when do you feel like, okay, now it's the focus on results, and where results are not there, then you dive deeper, or how do you work through that?
Yeah, so I do think like things continue to change, and as we grow, your risk profile changes, and there's different expectations. You need to be more consistent about how and when you deliver things. All of those things are true, but we still want to provide as much autonomy as possible. So as an example, recently we made some changes to like we put constraints on how big teams could be. And that was like a forcing function to cause teams to go break down problems into smaller problems to have more narrow scope. And in doing so, you are also intentional about how people are expected to interact. What's the patterns across these teams? And I kind of told the group like it's less about when you have these like big groups, you kind of end up with more process, more meetings, more whatever. If we can break these things into smaller chunks, you can become your own like little sovereign island where you're solving your piece. You still need to define whether that's an API interaction or a collaboration with the team. You need to define that and have that expectation. But we're being much more intentional. And those are the types of constraints I like to put in place where it's like, uh, yeah, it's not really, it's a high level constraint. You can only have, I only want you interacting with 8 other people. So like have a team of 9, but how you function within that team of 9 is very much up to you.
How many of those teams do you have today, if I may ask?
Uh, Probably, I think we have about 30. Yeah. Maybe a
Wow.
little over 30. Yeah.
And so, I love your approach. One question to you: how do you do that, but at the same time ensure that engineers have a holistic view of the product and
Mhm.
the company and their impact within that holistic view? Or even I go back and I may ask, does that matter? Does it matter that they understand the entirety of the thing, at least from a high level overview?
I think having been at Fetch for a while when you could know everything that was going on, recently I've been telling people we all need to get much more comfortable with not knowing everything that's going on.
Okay.
There's too much scope, and we have to learn to like trust each other and be able to execute within our space. Obviously, the team needs to know the general goals of the company. The team needs to know high level, interaction patterns and how we have our architecture set up. But for the most part, I really do believe the more you know, it's just cognitive load that you carry with you, and it's super expensive. And so if we can get people hyper focused on the things that they're building, um, we're good. But I think it also just need to remember who your customer is. Is your customer another team at Fetch, or is it an end user?
Right.
And if it's another team at Fetch, like you have to have that interaction. You have to do that. We also roll our teams, we call our teams packs because we have a dog theme, but we roll our packs into something called collectives. And that's a group of teams. And so that's also where, there's maybe 10 of those. So that's like a bigger space, and there's a product lead and a tech lead in that area. And their job is to more see that bigger picture and connect the dots and make sure that the teams themselves are executing on things that contribute to the bigger vision. But the teams themselves should be able to have a fairly narrow scope that they're working on.
Got it. Got it. What are some of the biggest challenges that you have encountered during Fetch expansion, and particularly about technology and team dynamics?
Yeah, it's tough. Every time you grow, you go through a different set of pains. And I think the lesson I've walked away with is that you do have to continually evolve, and you hit these breaking points, right? You put in a pattern, it works for a while, you get so big, you break it, and you have to like try something new. I think what's hard is you naturally think that's a bad thing, right? You don't want to like change the thing that's either worked for you or that you've just enjoyed and you've liked. But the other thing I've come to realize is that's all just part of growth, and change is not necessarily bad. If you're doing a reorg because you just added 50 people to the team, it doesn't mean your previous org was bad. It just means you added 50 people to the team, and it's time to like change the shape up and try something different.
How do you so how do you choose? I'm interested in, as your organization keeps growing, your leaders become more important, right? And how do you, what are you looking for in that group of your closest circle of trust and your leaders?
Yeah, I still think execution is just the number one thing. Being able to go out and get stuff done. Like I have a VP of engineering right now who's been working on a big project for us that has a very specific deadline, which isn't something we normally do. And normally he wouldn't be in the very weeds or details of a specific project, but we have people like that in different stages of leadership that are able to do those things. And that's just always been the most important thing. I think that's what helped me kind of eventually land in this spot, is being able to execute and prove that multiple times. Um, but yeah, you need to figure out sometimes as a leader, you don't want to be in the weeds. And sometimes on occasion, like there are short bursts where it's important that you get involved deeply and you go out and you help execute and make the thing happen.
How often does it happen to you that you need to go into the weeds and look at a specific, very specific problems?
I mean, it's not that frequent that it's like on fire or something like that. I typically try to go from, I'll spend a few weeks or a month on something and then focus my energy towards another space or area. It's not always engineering problems. Sometimes it's more like people problems or org structure problems or things like that. Um, right now we're growing a ton, so I'm like pouring a lot of my energy into recruiting and hiring and going through that. It's really just identifying in this given moment what does the team need the most, putting my energy towards that, and then hopefully kind of seeing a little bit into the future where our energy needs to go next. Um, and if I can help there, I will. Sometimes it's also about finding someone else that has the time or the capacity or is better at it to go execute on that need.
What are today the primary technological focuses at Fetch?
Yeah, so there's a handful. We're doing a lot to bring in more rewarding opportunities for users. So there's a lot of work going on for that, and we're going to be adding numerous new ways that people can earn points through Fetch. That's a big part of it. Another big exercise is we're trying to make the app much more personalized. We want everybody to have a unique experience when they come in. Our users share their purchase history online. They share their purchase history in stores physically. So we know what they're buying, when they're buying it, where they're buying it. And when they come into the app, they should have an experience that reflects the knowledge that we have about them, and that is highly personalized for them. So that's definitely a big effort and a big project and journey that we're on. There's also a ton of things for our partners, right? Like making our reporting really robust, easy for them to see. We want our partners, today we kind of manage a lot of this stuff for them, but we want them to be able to come into our platform, see how their spend is performing, and understand how to set up campaigns and all of those kinds of things. Um, and then there's, of course, a lot of work that we're always doing. So we're always improving our receipt scanning capabilities. We're always improving our product intelligence. We have a very big problem, which is to take any item in the United States of America that could possibly be on a receipt, and we want to match that to an item in our catalog.
Right.
And that's across thousands or tens of thousands of retailers who have different receipt formats and such. So it's a huge problem, and we're always working on that as well.
How do you think that will evolve during the next 5 years, especially with, as AI advances? Do you see a significant change in the way things are done coming?
I think yes. Um, it's already all ML based. I mean, you could argue it's already all AI driven,
Right.
but I think there's going to be continued improvements. I think the amount of things we can do on device is going to change over the years as opposed to what we do in our backend systems. So that'll be an interesting thing to see. I think there's also like really unique experiences we could provide where, our receipt scanning today is just very much a camera-based experience, but augmented reality and things are going to be really interesting and intriguing in the future. Um, and of course, yeah, like even the personalization aspect is going to be highly AI driven. And so that'll be interesting. There's a lot that we can do. And again, we have this very interesting data set about you as an individual. So there's a lot of experiences we could provide using AI to make that interesting, fun, engaging, and actually, more rewarding, like help you get more dollars back in your pocket.
Wait, for anyone listening in the audience that hears you out and they go like, I'm a young engineer and I would like to become a leader, a CTO as well. Um, and they want to transition into those leadership roles. What would be your advice to them?
People ask me that, especially early career people. I always tell them the number one thing we look for is trajectory, right? And if you're an
Right.
early career person, we want a really steep trajectory. So that's what I tell people to focus on early on. Um, I also just think there's something about it's okay to be intentional, but don't try to have like all these stepping stones, right? Like I'm going to do this at this company for 2 years, and then I'm going to do that at this company for 3 years.
Right.
And that's how I'm going to work my way to CTO. I think it's about being somewhere and executing at a high level and continuing to see those growth opportunities and then continuing to execute, like that's going to be the real trajectory boost for you. And then lastly, leadership is a learned skill. There are definitely natural leaders. There's definitely people who are more naturally inclined towards it, but it is a learned skill. There's tons of information out there on how to be a better leader, how to grow as a leader. You can do a lot of that through observation. We're all surrounded by leaders, so you can see, if you're surrounded by good leaders or bad leaders and learn from both of them. But I spent, 4 years going through ROTC and some time in the Army National Guard, and the Army is all about growing leaders. That's really
Right.
all they do. Everybody's a leader. You're a leader of yourself, and then you become a leader of other people. And it's very much the thing I walked away with is just it's a learned skill, and you can grow in that. And that's something people need to actually put energy into practicing.
what do you value the most in your leaders, and or what leaders impacted you the most that you remember them and go like, I learned so much from this one or that one or the one that I have today?
Yeah. I think there's a few things. One is people of integrity and people that aren't really there for themselves. I think if you're there to ideally be serving other people and making other people better, that's a really good trait for a leader. But also being willing to just sit in it with people too. Sometimes we were just at an event and we basically had like 3 16-hour days in a row. And I wasn't writing code, but I was just sitting with the engineers late at night,
Right,
hotel lobby at 10 p.m. They're shipping code, and I'm just like sitting there with them, buying them food, buying them drinks, whatever. And there's just something about just being there and being present and, um, you know, not viewing yourself as like a different person, right? These people
right.
are the real doers, and you just need to kind of be with them. So I think stuff like that is what I value the most.
A word that came up a lot during our conversation is execution, right? And that really, really makes a difference. And from what I hear, also, if you focus on getting execution right, opportunities will come. Can you tell me about one of the instances that you're proudest of where you executed something that was hard, but you got it done in time? You're proud about it.
Oh, yeah, I think there's been a few. There's been a couple releases at Fetch that were interesting. I think early on when I joined the company, we went from processing just grocery receipts, just grocery retailers to all receipts, so non-grocery retailers. Um, Maybe not the hardest project in the world, but there was like a pretty tight window on it. And
Right,
entering into a new company, didn't know the code base, didn't really know the people, and just kind of working through that. That was kind of my first thing that I like kind of executed on here and was a kind of a stepping stone for me or like a launching point for me. And then there was other releases that were struggling to get out the door, and then I would kind of go help in those areas and kind of help get them from pre-release to actually out to users, which is a very sometimes a very hard step to do. So those opportunities also came up multiple times. Um, yeah, I think they're not all the same type of thing or even necessarily as meaningful as business impact wise, but it's the ability to take something and just like will it through and will it through to
right.
fruition is important.
And what do you think is the biggest skill that helped you navigate that? Was it your analytical skills, the ability to decompose the problem and be creative about the solution? Was it the hard work and the hours you put to make sure that it was done in time? Was it a combination of both?
I think there's a few things. One is being able to hopefully put people that are within your team in the best positions, right? Where they're really good and they can execute. And then you're filling the gaps where you have skills that they might not. I think that's part of it. Um, I think another part of it is just trying to really bring like a calm presence. Because in those moments, there's a lot of chaos and pressure and excitement. I'm not really a worrier, not somebody that like has a hard time falling asleep because I'm worried about some project or something. It's just about consistent small wins. And that's like what I typically focus on. Okay. Take a big problem, which is all of engineering, but you just take a big problem, you break it down into smaller problems. And once you start having little wins, they really start to aggregate and then they build up and it's kind of a snowball effect. And so that's where I always encourage teams if they're struggling to release something big, I'm like, just release something small and
Right.
do that every single week. And guess what? Before you know it, you're done.
I love it. Consistent small wins. That could be the title for a book right there.
Yeah, for sure.
Wait, one final very random question to you. What do you do when you are not working?
Oh man, I'm married and I have two little boys. They're 3 and 5. So a lot of my time is spent with them. I enjoy playing basketball. I like being outside, being in the woods. go to church, have a community there. All of those things is typically where we spend our time, but definitely most of the time is with my family and just hanging out.
I feel you. I have a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old. Um, my life is similar. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait, thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation very much. I hope we can do this again in the future. I learned a lot. I know the audience is learning a lot. You have an amazing story, the growth that you experienced, the things that you have achieved. And you know what? You said something very important about bringing calm. I can see that. You show that. You are emitting that calm energy, right? But that consistency as well. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Mateo. It was fun.